You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر.
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, 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 golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
But 2.5 years ago, Kevin, I got a phone call. It was in the middle of the afternoon. I remember it well. And it was from a source that I trust very much that has given me some really good information in the past. And when I picked the phone up, the first thing the source said to me, and I still remember it well, was grab a pen and you might want to sit down for this one. The information that he was telling me, Kevin, was that the Canadian Soccer Association was far along at that point, and you may laugh when you hear the rest of this, was pretty far along in talks to create a Canadian Premier League. That name didn't exist at that point, but a league of our own. This was a dream of Canadian soccer fans that we thought was dead at the time, and it was just really quite remarkable to hear it from someone that I trusted this much. So I did, in fact, sit down and write all this down. I sat on it for about 2 weeks to 3 weeks because I wanted to verify it as much as I could, because I just simply did not want to run the risk of putting information like that out there if it wasn't true, because I know as a Canadian soccer fan how much that would hurt to have that kind of tease pulled out. Of course, as we all know, that story gained steam from the little, geeks that I talk to. No offense, I'm one of you. To the whole country basically now knowing.
No offense taken.
Yes. Yesterday, someone dug up a trademark application that went through out of the Hamilton Tiger Cats for 2 or 3 things. Hamilton United was one of them, which is a kind of a new thing that we hadn't heard. The other was Hamilton Steelers, the name of the Canadian Premier League or the Canadian Soccer League team from the 90s, and the Canadian Premier League was trademarked yesterday. So where there's smoke, there's fire. It took 2.5 years or so to get there. All those people that told me that I was making it up for attention back then, suck it. No, I wasn't. And in fact, I just explained to you why I never would have done that. So, it's a good day. We still don't have confirmation, so we're not going to talk too much about that, but I thought it was worth leading the show off with that, Kevin.
Yes, that's the latest in the development, is the trademark of the Canadian Premier League, the wording itself, Hamilton Steelers, Hamilton United. At least it's getting some concrete evidence, we could say now.
Yeah, it does seem like it is moving forward. And I hesitated to give dates after I gave a date last year, about a year ago now, that I was told, and I was told in good confidence that this was true, that I had expected it around the Grey Cup last year. No announcement, of course, came. And since that time, I've sort of pulled back from putting any concrete dates out there, because what I've come to realize is that the people that are involved in this project are not going to make any announcements until they have everything set in stone. And that's a good thing. A lot of people look at that as evidence that maybe it's not happening. But to me, I look at that as evidence that they know how important it is to get it right. So this is a good step, and it is in line. This is all I'll say. It's in line with the timetables I've been most recently told. So hopefully this will continue to grow. And I'll tell you what, the day it happens will be one of the happiest days on a personal, professional, everything life for me. I will be overjoyed that day. This is a very personal story for me on every level. Not just a journalistic story. I'm not indifferent to this. I don't pretend to be indifferent when it comes to issues of Canadian soccer, when it comes to reporting them. So there you go. Kevin, on that note, do you have anything to say before I move on? We're talking about MLS games from last night.
No, go ahead.
All right. There was some midweek action. We got James Sharman booked for 11:15 today to preview the Premier League and to specifically look at that Liverpool United game on Monday. James Sharman of Sportsnet, of course, and formerly of The Score. But before we do that, so we're going to break down a little bit of the midweek action. Two teams were eliminated from the playoffs last night, Kevin. So we should have a little moment, just to share a little moment. I will remember you, Columbus Crew. Will you remember me?
What we'll remember from the Columbus Crew is that spat on the field between Duane and Kamara this season. That's for sure. That's where the season of the Columbus truly took a turn for the worst.
No, yeah. This, of course, it's hard to remember now that they were in the MLS Cup last year, and exactly. A lot of people, how quickly things change. And I guess, I'm not one for intangibles normally, but obviously the locker room split that happened with Kamara, and it absolutely devastated this team. They were never able to recover. But I mean, it's more than that. I think it's you can talk about the intangibles. The actual tangibles are pretty significant too, and that is, the Kamara that stayed behind wasn't as good as the Kamara that left, right? And that is really just, you can't replace goals. Again, it's so many times we've said in the show that, offense wins MLS championships. And if you take that many goals out of a team, especially a team that was basically designed, was geared, was tactically, was set up to play for Kamara, to get those garbage goals, to get that in, those scrappy kind of goals that he would put in. And when you take him out of that lineup, suddenly you have to reinvent yourself a month and a half into the season. And the Crew, although they got it going a little bit later as the summer got older, they never really got it all together. And as we saw last night with the draw against Chicago 2-2, a game that they were leading at one point, it's all done now but the crying, and there will be a lot of soul searching in Ohio, I think. Although there weren't many people there to watch it, so I don't know how much soul searching there'll be.
There's going to be a lot of soul searching in San Jose, Duane. Usually San Jose Earthquakes are very productive and have a good season in even years, 2016 being one of them. Everybody had a certain amount of expectations with Duane and Adam John. Yeah, they lost Alan Gordon, one of the Goonies figurehead of the powerhouse, kind of, that the Earthquakes were a few years ago.
They won a major trophy, so there you go.
Yeah, exactly. They were a contender. It hasn't been the case. Dominic Kinnear has been struggling lately since his return to San Jose after his dismissal with the Houston Dynamo 2 years ago. Dominic Kinnear, what I remember from him in the Houston Dynamo days and Earthquakes before that, when they moved to Dynamo, they were a team that found a way in, and once they were in, they would almost end up pulling a Galaxy and made it in the final. We've seen this happen versus the Galaxy twice. We've seen Houston go on playoff runs. It hasn't happened with the Earthquakes since Kinnear moved back there. There's a lot of different reasons for it, but even with the Dynamo, Dominic Kinnear was a very successful coach in the MLS 2.0 era. And I know we talk a lot about the coaches, and sometimes we over talk about the coaches because it's the players who play the game. But it's interesting to say that a few weeks ago when they were in Montreal, they were still not technically eliminated, but everybody knew that it was going to be tough. They had to win out, and the white flag wasn't raised, but it was halfway there. It's interesting to me to see that Dominic Kinnear recently, it wasn't necessarily a good results for him, and not able to bring a team a la Houston Dynamo, where he used to be able to coach a ragtag type of team with outcasts from the entire league, with a few superstars, and we're able to bring them far in the playoffs. I don't think he has adjusted accordingly. Maybe I'm speaking through my hat, which is very possible. It's always possible. But that MLS 3.0 era that we seem to be part of, where you need to be a young team and have those type of DPs, it's just not happening in San Jose right now.
Yeah, I find Kinnear an interesting cat in the sense that if you look at his evolution as a coach, he, of course, was mentored by Frank Yallop, who everyone associates as kind of the shining example of MLS 1.0 coaching, and how 1.0 coaching failed to adjust to the 2.0 era, which Yallop, I think, at this point in time, we can safely say did not. And, eventually finds themselves in Arizona coaching USL teams. And I think Kinnear, as his, mentored by Yallop, now kind of faces the same thing. I think he adjusted a little more than Yallop did to the 2.0 era. But now that I think we're in the 3.0 era, and I wonder how long we're going to do these 0.0 era stuff. It's very 2000s-y. But anyway, the MLS 3.0 era, which I think it's safe to say we are fully in that by now. Maybe it's past him. It's 4 straight years out of the playoff forums. I did a poll last night, Kevin. I kind of knew what the results were going to be before I put it out there. But, has MLS 3.0 bypassed Dominic Kinnear? 82% said yes, 18% said no. That was the respondents to that yesterday, and that's kind of the feeling there.
We're not necessarily just talking about the way he managed the team, but more the way the team is built, because that was one of the description of a Dominic Kinnear too, and he didn't do a lot of necessarily of locker room changes that were big enough to change the earthquake since he came in. He still have the same type of core of player, minus 1 or 2 players than a few years ago. So no, it's interesting to at least think about it and see where it goes in the future. Is he the type of coach that will be back with the Earthquakes? He probably has a job for life at the Earthquakes if he decides to. So it'll be interesting to see where they go from there.
Yeah, no, their management structure is very loyal to their philosophies, whether they work or not. San Jose is kind of I was joking last night when I was watching this game with my girlfriend that it was the anonymous derby because, with all due respect to Colorado, who's having a remarkable season, of course, but these are two teams that really outside of their markets don't have a lot of resonance, right? Like a lot of people think about these teams, not a lot of people talk about these teams, both San Jose and Colorado. So it was the anonymous derby. San Jose might be the king of that, though. I mean, since they came back in 2008, they haven't really struggled to come near the importance, the relevance that they had prior to leaving to Houston originally. As much as I supported an MLS team back before TFC, it was San Jose because of D-Row. So I watched a lot of that back then. I followed them pretty closely back then, and they certainly were one of the more important franchises in the first part of the era because they had dominant players. They had great players that like D-Row, like Donovan, that came through that program, and they were highly successful, one of the more successful teams out there. But, as I said, since they've come back, the new era, and I don't think, you can, the name is the same, but in many ways it's the same kind of history connection to that era as it was, as Vancouver is to the NASL days in some ways, right? Like it's kind of precarious, and I think it shows. They've struggled outside of that one season, which we can now maybe look as an outlier in terms of what they were doing to really have any relevance in this league. And
let's not forget they had that great season by Wondolowski with 27 goals, where that came out of nowhere. Never really been replicated, not even close to it. So it was like a perfect storm that year. We had a few young prospects coming in. You had the Alan Gordon, Chris Wondolowski, Goonies never die, scoring goals at the 92nd minute to always tie or win games. You had that perfect storm those years too. So it's funny to see the non-evolution on the pitch for the Earthquakes, which look at a team below them. They're in the same boat over the last 12 months, and maybe that's the reason why they're 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Goonies time and all that sort of stuff, and it's a great story, great narrative, right? Like everyone loves that, and they love this idea that a team is has all these intangibles, and they can rise up, and their intensity will they'll never quit, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, time after time after time after time after time, we hate to be the wet blanket on this, but time after time, this is proven to be not sustainable. It's basically, we hate to use this term when we're talking about sports, it's basically luck. And they had a lot of luck in one year, and they had a player that had a career year, as you said, and he hasn't been able to fully replicate it since then. And as I said off the top of this, goals win games in MLS. And when you're scoring, haven't got one guy scoring 27 of them, then you're going to win some games. And when you get a little bit of luck thrown into that mix as well, hey, you can go deep. But at the end, that team wasn't the champion, right? They did fall at the end. The Supporters' Shield is something that is not you shouldn't dismiss outright, but at the same time, it is clearly the secondary reward in MLS's major trophy. It's two of three in the ranking of the trophies that you can win within Major League Soccer. Speaking of the Supporters' Shield, we should briefly mention the remarkable season of Colorado, which have been written for dead at the start of the year. After they started to slump a little bit, got a lot of draws there, we kind of wrote them off again. And here we are now. They are the top team in the league. I was looking up flights to Denver last night, Kevin.
I guess Tim Howard and company. Well, because we talked about before how the Zach McMath in the first 4 months of this season was able to keep his team at a high level, over 2 points per game average, and you had the Jermaine Jones injury and all that. So once people come back from injury, Tim Howard settles, you get used to it. Well, I guess Colorado are good.
All right, we might have to have another Colorado show in the very near future, as they certainly are making us pay attention to them this year. All right, let's take a break. We're going to get James on the line, and we'll talk a little Premier League.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we are back on Soccer Today. It's with great pleasure that we are joined by Sportsnet own James Sharman. James, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, fellas. How you doing?
Good, James. Before we get into talk, we wanted to have you on to talk about Liverpool United on Monday specifically, and the Premier League in general. Beyond that, including this weekend's games, which you can watch a lot of them on Sportsnet, of course. But before I do that, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the man that you're the big shoes that you're filling right now. Of course, you're the host of the Sportsnet soccer coverage now. Jerry Dobson just stepped down after many years. He was synonymous with the sport for those of us who grew up here. Just talk about from your perspective of what Jerry brought to the game and to the broadcasting industry in general.
Yeah, so much. Let's be honest. I mean, I knew Jerry, not too well, just from the scene, basically, for a number of years. I mean, I've been involved in soccer media since late '90s in this country, and obviously Jerry was the man back then. And then about 3 years ago, when Sportsnet bought The Score, I was kind of thrown into the fire, so to speak, and got to know Jerry as a professional and personally, and just a fantastic guy. When I first arrived, I figured he had every right to be a little bit suspicious. There's this new guy appearing on the scene, but it was never that way. He was very welcoming, and I had the chance the last coverage, which was never really my forte. I was more of a host, but having the chance to sit beside Jerry and just to see how he went about his business from a professional standpoint was invaluable. And he was really open to giving me little tips here and there. And it made my little my move to the host chair so much easier, having sat beside him. I'm sure he wasn't aware of it, but we'll be doing Premier League on the Saturday or Champions League, and I'll be just studying him, and I'm sure he wasn't aware of that at the time. But it made my job a lot easier when I finally took the host chair. So great guy, and let's be honest, he was the face of soccer in this country for close to 20 years.
It's just my biggest regret for him is that I never got to hear him say, and Canada has qualified for a World Cup. But I'll take it from anyone at this point.
He's got some streaks, man, and he jokes about it. TFC, Canada, a number of games he called without calling any goals or anything positive, man. So that guy deserves a happy retirement. He went through it with the Canadian team, that's for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. Many of us have. James, let's move across the pond to the Premier League and specifically to the Liverpool-Manchester United game on Monday. Which is it still the biggest fixture on the English calendar in the domestic side of things?
That's a great question because we all know it was for so many years. It's certainly lost something in the last number of years since Liverpool became, let's be honest, and also ran for the last. Well, I hate to say it because I'm a fan, obviously, almost 2 decades. But it's still a massive game. It goes beyond the result. It goes beyond the table. The rivalry is still there. The 2 most successful teams in English soccer. So there's certainly that remains a grit in this game. And there's going to be no one pulling out challenges, that's for sure. But as far as, is it the most important game? I don't think so. Not anymore. That might change. But I think at this point, you ask most fans, and Duane, I know you'll appreciate this, but I think City United has almost overtaken it in that regard.
Yeah, certainly that would be my answer to that too. But you can't ignore the historical importance of this or what this rivalry means to the fans that are involved. Obviously, James, let's look specifically at Monday. How do you see this playing out in general? Who do you think has the advantage heading into this one?
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating tilt, isn't it? Because the 2 teams kind of going in the same direction. New faces in charge. New faces on the field, playing a very different style than we saw in the last number of years. United, I thought they started the season so well. I thought the swagger was back. And then suddenly, 3 or 4 bad results in a row. And then they bounced back against Leicester and it looked fantastic. But then they play Stoke and they draw 1-1. Now, in fairness, they could have won that game 4-5-1. Quite honestly, great performance by Lee Grant in goal for Stoke. And Jose Mourinho came up post-match and says, that was by far the best performance of the season. Now, I can't imagine Sir Alex Ferguson ever saying that after a 1-1 draw at home against Stoke. But it's Jose, saying what he did. And in fairness, they played a little bit better in that game than perhaps in previous weeks, aside from the Leicester match. They're a team that's finding themselves. They're finding how do you fit Paul Pogba into that midfield. What is Wayne Rooney now? Is this United team now better without him? So they're finding their feet, whereas I think Liverpool have found their feet in many regards. Obviously, Klopp coming aboard around this time last year, they figured out what he wants. They're having some great performances start this season. They've got their swagger back for sure. I would think they probably should be the favourites in this match, especially against at Anfield as well. But I think when we look at the table at the end of the year, you still might see United ahead of Liverpool, but this match is going to be a good little statement for both teams. And it does definitely, I mentioned before how it's not quite what it used to be, this matchup, but you're right, it is still very special. And I think this one in particular is as intriguing as it's been for some years.
When you mentioned Klopp that arrived at the club a little bit less than a year ago, we've seen many managers come to Liverpool over the last decade thinking that they will be the one to regain the former glory. I think it's maybe the first time where people are actually buying it. Is Jurgen Klopp and where Liverpool are actually going right now, are they on the right path? Are they close to going back to become a contender for the Premier League?
Oh, I think they are. I mean, you're right. There's been way too many managers in recent years. Brendan Rodgers had a great little stint there for a couple of years, but he was dependent on one player. Let's be honest, Luis Suarez. was that team, and he was the main reason why that team was so good for that one and a half years. Whereas Klopp comes aboard, and he's the first guy to say, I don't want a star player. I don't need that guy. I need 11 players, preaching from the same prayer sheet here. That's what he wants, and that's what he's accomplished here. And certain players have really stood up. Adam Lallana, to me, is a prime example of someone that's just taken what Klopp's asked of him and gone beyond that. When Lallana was purchased from Southampton, we all knew he was a very good player with a lot of potential. Loved that Southampton system, but it didn't really fit under Rodgers. Whereas Klopp comes aboard, it's a similar system to what he had at Pochettino at Southampton, and it fits his game perfectly. So I think they're very much in the right pathway here. That being said, at some point, if they keep getting better and better, the fans will demand that big player, that big name, spend the big money. And I wonder if that will fit Klopp's mandate. If the player's there, sure, he'll get him. But number one, he wants a guy that's going to buy into the system. And it's more the collective than the individual. But personally, I go back to the 80s, when I first started watching football, and why I became a fan of this team was the way they played under Kenny Dalglish. And I'm seeing a similar way now. These players are really enjoying their football now, and the fans are enjoying the gesticulations and the sidelines by their manager. He's got real verve, he's got personality, and that club, I think, needs that. So absolutely, they're on the right path. Trouble is, they're in this era now where, last year may have been the year for a team like the Reds to make that move. I look at City, I look at United, Chelsea are going to get better. They're going to spend money. Arsenal will always be Arsenal. So they're in this era where it's very, very hard, I think, to make that next step and become a champion. But perhaps baby steps, and the next step is top four for this club under Klopp.
The fact that we're early in this season, people don't necessarily put that much of importance on that game. But how important is Monday's game, James? If United gets another loss against a contender, it could be almost a dream of Mourinho to come back in his first season in United and be a title contender.
Yeah, he needs this game a lot more, I think, than Liverpool do. Klopp could lose this game, and given what's happened so far, the fans will go, okay, yeah, that sucks. That's awful. We're not happy. But, it's okay, Jurgen. You're going to figure this out. I think if Mourinho loses this game, there's going to be a slight turn on him from the fan base, which is probably unfair. I mean, this guy's proven. But he's got to gain some respect, I think, given what happened last year at Chelsea. Has he lost his magic? A win on Monday will turn that. The fan base still look at this game as being extremely important, if not the most important game of the season. If they can beat their arch rivals, traditionally Liverpool, that's going to bring a brand new narrative to this United season. So I think for them it's far, far more important, and he'll be taking this extremely seriously.
James, let's turn our attention to the rest of the schedule for this weekend and start with the first game of the weekend, Leicester and Chelsea to start it off. A lot of drama around Chelsea this week. It seems like there's something in the water in West London. I don't know, but maybe. And Leicester, of course, maybe they're a little disappointed in how they've started their defense campaign, although they've done well in the Champions League. What do you see happening there?
Yeah, I love these rumors from London about Conte's future. Like, come on, people, let's relax. I know it's Roman in charge there, but he's not that mad, is he? He's not going to let this guy go. Obviously, Sorry,
I was just saying you never know with him, but yeah, you're probably right.
You don't. I remember that. I remember getting a phone call about Jose Mourinho all those years ago. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, you're right. Anything can happen. You're right. But I mean, let's be honest. This guy's rebuilding this team. He didn't bring too much in the off season. I think he's realised that perhaps the job's bigger than he first thought. They're going to spend some money. They just signed this ridiculous deal with Nike now. I think it cost him £40 million to get out of the Adidas deal. So they're very much looking big picture right now. And that doesn't mean firing one of the great tacticians in world football. So I think Chelsea will be fine. This year may not be their year to win the championship, but I can very much see them clawing back into that top four. And you're playing this Leicester team who, let's be honest, I think it's being found out a little bit that they're a decent team and they're going to be fine this year. But last year was a freak year on so many levels, not least of which was the big boys weren't very good. And that really helped Leicester, and that's taken nothing away from them. But they're going to be okay. And it seems that they're kind of putting most of their eggs in the European basket this year. They're playing great in the Champions League. They're going to improve in the Premier League. But I think it's going to be an interesting match, though, for sure. Two teams with something to prove this year, for sure. John Terry's back, if not this weekend, very soon. And, I can't believe we're saying that, John Terry is part of the reason why they're not playing very well in his absence. I mean, I wrote this guy off a couple of times the last number of years, but he is playing pretty well in that Conte system. Although Conte has gone to a back three again the last couple of weeks, and I'm not sure how JT fits into that. It'll be interesting to see. But if he's healthy again, maybe that brings something back to the team. But overall, Chelsea, they're going to be fine. It's been, like I said, a very average start to the season, but they're coming off that win against Hull with three at the back. Costa's scoring goals. Willian's looking great. When Luis finds out what the hell he is, and when we find out what Luis is, they'll be okay this year.
A very interesting matchup as well on the Sportsnet. Arsenal-Swansea. Arsenal are, without making big waves, becoming one of the favorites this year with Spurs. How important is stability, the famous word that Arsene Wenger always used? How important is slowly building just pieces by pieces? If you look at it over the last 3 years, Ozil, Sanchez, Giroud to the spec, but it wasn't really successful to that extent yet. But all key pieces slowly added to the team to see them gel the way they are doing this year. It's actually, in hindsight, you kind of see that as a brilliant move by Arsene Wenger, especially.
Yeah, you do. But I tell you, I'm seeing this, and they're doing what they always do. They're just doing enough now to get the fans excited, aren't they? Which means they're set for like a 3 or 4 game dip. They do it every single year. They look brilliant. They're like world beaters for weeks at a time. And then something happens, and no one knows what it is. Something happens, and they go in that dip in form, and the fans turn against Arsene Wenger. I mean, guys, it was 3 weeks ago that the whole Premier League narrative was Arsene Wenger. He should leave now. He should quit. He's not good enough. He's over the hill. And then within 3 weeks, now he's king of the world again. Should be England manager. It's incredible. It really is. This team's wonderful on paper. They can play the best football in the Premier League, I think, on their best day, but they haven't proven to me they can do it over 38 games in a season. Maybe this will be the year, but I know I've picked them to win it the last 2 years, and both times they let me down and embarrassed me. So I cannot jump on this bandwagon just yet. But you're right. I mean, they are wonderful. The way they move the ball. I mean, we talk about Sanchez and Ozil and the midfield, but look at the back right now. The fullbacks, Bellerin. I mean, he is just fun to watch, isn't he? Let's be honest. He's just exciting. And there's a reason why Barcelona won him badly away at City as well. This guy is the real deal. So as much as the big names get all the press, I think what Wenger's done with some of the lesser known players in that team is more impressive. Enjoy it where you can, Arsenal fans, because I just don't think it's going to last the entire season.
Yeah, I picked Arsenal to win the title at the start of the season, and I was attacked mercilessly by Arsenal fans, mostly.
But they are the most thin-skinned bunch, by the way.
Yeah, fair enough. There is a London derby of sorts this weekend, and it is kind of fascinating to me. Crystal Palace, West Ham, of course. West Ham, what the hell's going on there, James? What's happening?
It's a complete gong show, isn't it? On and off the field. So good last year. Defensively, they started this season off poorly, and they just haven't found their form. I don't know what it is. I mean, there are a lot of injuries, especially at the fullback position. They lost some depth there. That's an issue. There's no doubt about it. Is Mark Noble getting a little bit older? He was very important last year. Dimitri Payet hasn't quite been the same player despite that wonder goal last time out. I think there's a lot of distractions too. You talk to people who know West Ham, and Craig Forrest being a prime example, knows West Ham as well as anyone. He says that you play at Upton Park, and it was awful for the opponents. It was so hard. It was so intimidating. The fans on the players. They were so close to the field. They were nasty, vociferous. And then the new stadium, they're 20 yards away. It's walk in the park for visiting teams, and I think that's part of what it is. Certainly, that intimidation at home has certainly gone. And just, I guess, an average team, and some other teams are playing a lot better this year. But it's a bit of a shame because we wanted to see West Ham do well this year in the new stadium. For all its imperfections, long term, that's a sweet deal for this club and can take this club to new heights. Now the fans are apparently fighting in the stands outside amongst themselves. There's a lot of issues there. And I know Karen Brady, who's running the show there these days, she's come out the last couple of weeks and says, we're going to figure this out. Don't worry, just have patience. Well, in this league, patience goes only so far. And before you know it, you're in the 8th ball. Because right now, they're in a relegation fight, which I don't think anyone saw.
Yeah, fair enough, James. All right, James Sharman from Sportsnet. You can see him on your TV all weekend, as I often do. Appreciate your time today, and hopefully we'll talk down the line.
Thanks, boys. Anytime.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS post-game show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And welcome back. I don't know if we, Kevin, we didn't ourselves talk about Jerry Dobson, did we? When he retired, I think we mentioned it, but I'm not sure.
We mentioned it, yeah, but no, we didn't really spend a lot of time on it. No, Jerry Dobson, a few months ago now, retired from TV, and it was a moment where it was kind of bittersweet because it's good for him. He's retiring. He's gonna fulfill his dream of how his retirement would have always loved to be. But we will miss that sultry voices and that call when Porter scored the goal in CONCACAF Champions League. Oh, Jerry, that was the opportunity. So good.
There you go. Yeah, no, look, Jerry Dobson is a voice that I will always associate. Well, I predate a little bit, so I can remember when he first started to come in. He basically took it on himself to get soccer on TV and on Canadian televisions, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for that. A lot of times, because Jerry wasn't necessarily a play-by-play guy by trade. He learned how to do that. So I think a lot of times Canadian fans focused on him maybe misidentifying a player here and there, which, was funny at the time, ha, ha, ha. But the reality is he deserves a lot of credit for really being one of the driving forces between the amount of coverage that we now get. And if you're new to watching it here, you're spoiled compared to what it was 15, 20 years ago, especially 15, even 5 years ago. Everything is on now, and it's quite remarkable.
I've watched the DPRK play against Congo, or I can't remember who. U17 Women's World Cup on TV yesterday.
Yeah,
so that's how the offering of soccer has never been to the extent that it is right now. And yeah, we complain sometimes about the coverage of our MLS team. We kind of have to enjoy it while it lasts because we actually have more than we ever did before on TV.
Fair enough. All right, let's move past that. There was a couple quick items that I wanted to get to in this block, what we have left. There was a piece of paper that was published by FIFA yesterday where they were promising to reform themselves again. Kevin, I always am reluctant to go too much into these grand plans that these places, people like FIFA do, because ultimately it's whatever. But real quickly, for the record, this is what they promised in their what's it called here, the FIFA 2.0, a vision for the future. So there's basically the bullet points are here. They're going to invest $4 billion over the next decade on development through the 211 member associations. They're going to increase the total participation in football. So they're trying to get from 45% of the world playing the game to 60% of the world playing the game.
It means as a football nations, like there's a federation of soccer in that nation, then that will qualify in the 60%. Because that's what I mean. They can't mean 60% of the population of the planet.
No, they mean 60% of the population of the planet playing football. Yes.
Okay.
They're claiming that 45% of the, which maybe that's they're probably doing what we do here in Canada, where anyone who's kicked the ball once is considered to have played the game. But anyway,
did you ever play soccer one afternoon? Yes. Okay. No, you played soccer.
Yeah, that's pretty much what they're doing there. They're going to set the goal of doubling women's participation to 60 million. This is probably the most significant one on here. Right now, there's 30 million women that play the game. They're trying to double that by 2026 to 60 million playing the game by making this one. I shouldn't laugh, but the strategy to bring women's football to the mainstream. And I asked, why is it not in the mainstream already? It's just football played by women. It should be in the mainstream already, but that's maybe something that's a little too subtle, that argument. Anyway, they're going to, this one scares me. I'll read this directly. Change the current model to take more direct control of critical business operations, including FIFA World Cup ticketing and FIFA World Cup organizing activities, and establishing working groups to evaluate the process of bringing the operations in-house to better ensure optimal financial returns and customer satisfaction, as well as the highest standards of transparency and good governance. Okay, that's terrifying, that last one.
What does it say, basically? Is it going to centralize everything to make sure that, hey, if it's only us, well, we control everything and we're going to be transparent. But if we go back to history, that's not going to be there. Okay, I understand why you can be afraid now.
Yeah, they're suggesting FIFA, one of the most corrupt organizations that we can remember in our lifetimes, is suggesting the way to deal with their corruption issues is to bring things more in-house.
To give us more power. You know, I know what we can do to fight them. Let's give us more power and we can be... that's never good.
To be serious about it for a second, what they're probably getting at is that they want to take the powers away from the confederations and bring them to FIFA. So they're trying to take a federal system and make it central, right? That's kind of what they're saying here. And you look at Jack Warner, scalping tickets. They want to avoid that kind of scandal.
So they're taking a democracy and turning it into a dictatorship, basically.
Yeah, the ticketing thing is a huge one, I guess. Yeah, the ticketing thing is a huge thing because what happens is they give a certain amount of tickets to the federations, right? And of course, World Cup tickets are in high demand to watch these games. So these little places, like every country in like the 211 member federations, all get a certain allocation of tickets for a World Cup. For a men's World Cup, we're talking about here because that's the big daddy of the whole thing that makes them the most money and there's the most demand on it. So they take those tickets and they scalp them for their own needs. So if they're trying to address that, then fair enough. But just this idea of bringing things internally, I don't know about that, Kevin. Anyway, ultimately these things can be, what's the Road to Wellness or whatever the hell the CSA published 10 years ago. Like they gather dust on shelves 9 times out of 10. So whatever. But we'll watch this carefully as we always do because it's FIFA and you got to watch them carefully because if you don't, well, we all know what happens then.
Who watches the Watchmen? Exactly.
Who knows? All right. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this Atlantic League thing that's been floating around the other day. The Guardian had an article on it. It's an interesting concept, and basically it's a reaction to the Champions. Well, as we all know, the Champions League changed its format a little bit to make it even more friendly to the big four leagues, right? So the smaller leagues in Europe, and in these cases, in these Atlantic leagues, these are kind of what I would call middling leagues in Europe, are kind of feeling that they're being pushed out. So we've heard lots of talk in the past about the so-called Super League, which I think is a doomed project because I think that you're underestimating the amount of resistance there is in Europe to breaking up or doing anything that might threaten the powers of the national leagues. But this is kind of a reaction to this, and this one's more interesting to me. It's because we have a bunch of smaller leagues that really are kind of getting overshadowed and getting pushed out, trying to form one bigger league so that they might have more equal footing in that. So you'd have the Atlantic League would be Scotland, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, Norway, and Sweden having one super league that would have their top clubs in that for all those countries. And it is difficult, Kevin, to argue against their basic premise is that it would be better for their top teams to play more than one other top team a year, which, you think of Scotland as the prime example that most here will be familiar with, right? Like
that Celtic only faces Rangers to the equal level footing in their own premiership. And when they go to Europe, I can understand the fact that you want to face higher competition in your day-to-day operation, not just when you go on the continent level, and the Atlantic League will address that as situation. That could be interesting, but you mentioned then it gets convoluted. Does it take away of the importance of the national championships? How do you make it? Do you make it the top two of the Belgium League, of the Scotland Premier League, get promoted to the Atlantic League, and you can get relegated back to your Continental League? How do you actually make it happen for that one time? Because the leap of faith, I'm going to get out of my national championship and join that league, is going to be hard to make. You're going to have to find a way to almost for teams to qualify into that Atlantic League, especially over the years. That's what it needs to be. You need to continue to have that relationship with openness in European soccer. So it will be interesting to see how, if it ever happens, how practically they do it too, so no team feels disrespected. Because if it's only two teams from Belgium, maybe the third one, Standard de Liège, or another one will be like, well, we were supposed to be on there. So it brings a lot of problem up as well as just solutions to problems.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Rangers. Right now, Rangers isn't probably the second best team in Scotland. Now, they are the second most financially, they have the second biggest financial possibilities. So they would likely be a team that would buy their way into that league. And you'd essentially, there's a lot to talk about and unpack this. So we might investigate this more thoroughly next week. We're going to have to leave it here in a second. But You might have to, basically what you're having happen is the opposite of what people argue with here. You're taking closed systems in North America, and all the pro-rel truthers want to just shove pro-rel into it. Whereas this is you're taking open systems and you want to shove a closed system into it, which is essentially what this is. You're right. In an ideal world, there would be some kind of way to move up and down, but I have suspicions that the vision that these people have isn't quite like that, that they're just going to create this league. Whether it would be approved, I don't know. It certainly is a pushback against the idea of a big league. And the other part about this is a slippery slope. They allow UEFA allows an Atlantic League to form, then they don't really have a lot of power to stop La Liga, Bundesliga, the Premier League, and Serie A from taking their top teams and forming a Super League.
You create a precedent, and you literally open the way. You pave the way for the bigger clubs to just you know what? They did it. We could do it too.
Yeah, and I guarantee you, Super League is going to be closed.
Yes,
all right,
and closed, and it's going to take more media coverage and more attention than the Atlantic League. That's for sure.
Yeah, it would take all the attention off everything in the world. It would completely engulf the rest of the world football. That's the argument against it. I mean, I understand as a fan how it would be fun to watch. It certainly would be, and obviously, if they announce it tomorrow, I'm going to cover it and watch it. But I understand how it would just be this giant, monster that would sort of just go over Europe and just flatten everything in its path in terms of attention. Like, it's hard enough to get people to support their local game now. Imagine if that thing's out there, you forget about it. Like, no one's going to watch a Bournemouth. A Leicester never happens again because they're just going to squash it out. And I appreciate when I'm saying this. I hear myself. I know that I'm making the same argument the pro-rellers do here.
Yes, I know. Me too. I was thinking about the same thing, but it's different. We're talking about a different continent, different market.
We're talking about Europe, where the game's established, whereas it's not as established here, and there's financial considerations you have to put into that. All right, Kevin, we are over on this block. We have the games of the week to get to next, so let's take a quick break and get to them.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
St. Clair, their new album's out soon. We have their single. We're going to get it out there and preview it in a bit. Time has been our enemy this week, Kevin. Let's look, I guess, start with the NASL team games. That season is getting close to the end. Edmonton, of course, clinched the playoff spot last week. Fort Lauderdale, Puerto Rico, Jacksonville, Cosmos, Indy 11, Carolina, Minnesota, Edmonton, and Rio will play the Ottawa Fury this week. Anything jump out at that before we move on?
No.
We'll give a little more attention. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Nothing really jumped out on what games are coming. What jumped out at me was yesterday on Twitter. Jason Davis, host of the United States of Football on Sirius XM. He was United States of Soccer.
USS.
Yeah, the USS, that show. Former Soccer Morning. He talked about with a former legend of the Rowdies, and apparently that former legend was told that the Rowdies are moving away from the NASL next season, probably going to join the USL. So we'll see. We'll continue to keep an eye on that story, but it is more than just rumors at this point. You remember a few weeks ago, there was a out of the blue rumor that the NASL was going to be folded and absorbed by the USL. Everybody's like, nah, it's not going to happen. But the writings are on the wall now, and we actually have some proof and some smoke to go probably with the fire that's coming in a few weeks, where maybe not folding as a whole, but a few defections seem to be in the future plans for both of those leagues.
All right, and speaking of which, the Ottawa Fury, I did actually put a little Twitter out there yesterday on this. I was speaking to someone yesterday that was talking about the situation. Basically, what they backed up was a report that Steven Sandor had already made. So I'll give credit to Steven for first breaking this, is that there is no application with the CSA for them to switch to the USL. That's an important consideration, because in order for Ottawa to play in the USL, they would need approval from both the USL and the CSA. And as of right now, there is no application for them to go into the CSA. It took close to a year to approve the TFC2, FC Montreal, and the Vancouver Whitecaps 2. It took nearly a year to approve that application. Now, it might take a little bit less time now because there's already established quotas in that have been worked out. Obviously, if Ottawa were to make that jump and they were allowed to by both those two bodies, they would need to probably follow. I don't think there's probably about it. They would need to follow the USL quotas, which are pretty restrictive, and it would make it very difficult for Ottawa to compete at the USL level. I don't have a lot of sympathy for that. If you're going to go down to USL and you're going to force your way out and force the hand like this, then you're going to have to follow the 50% or the 60% lineup and 50% roster rules that are out there. So have at it if that's the case. The other part of this that I want to just quickly say this, and I am planning to do a special Ottawa show sometime in the future. Once we have a little more information, I think that it's not really relevant to do it right now for a full one until we know more. The other part of this is that I don't understand why people just assume that the USL would accept them for 1 year, if that's what the provision is from the CSA sanctioning, and I can't see the CSA sanctioning them for more than a year in the USL with the Canadian Premier League now seemingly on the absolute horizon. Why would you accept them in the USL? Why would you say, okay, come for a year? Why? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So there's a lot more hoops to jump through here than I think people in Ottawa, and I get it too. You want your team to find a way, and you don't want to lose your team, and I absolutely empathize with that. So I'm not at all blaming or questioning the fans' motives here, but I think that I am questioning a little bit of the ownership's motives to be putting these stories out there when I think that it's a hell of a lot more complicated than it is, Kevin.
All right, let's talk about Major League Soccer now. Games in the weekend, Sunday, 3 p.m. for all the games in the Eastern Conference, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 Pacific for all the games in the Western Conference. Let's start with Chicago and New England. New England kind of needs to win to stay in the hunt, Duane.
Yeah, it must win there for sure, especially playing a team like Chicago, who's already played spoiler once this week, Kevin. So certainly I think that if Philadelphia has surprisingly been the team that teams are trying to rein in now. It really is just between, I think, Philadelphia and New England for that final spot. So we'll be looking at that one as well as the Union playing in Orlando at 3 o'clock as well. All the games are in the East are at 3 o'clock, and all the games in the West are at 5 o'clock this week because MLS has decided that they're going to monetize this by naming it something. I forget what they named it, and I'm not even going to give them any credit for that, but that's what they're doing because that's what MLS does, folks.
Yeah, exactly. And we have DC United NYCFC, a game for positioning for both club. Montreal TFC. Montreal with the magic number of 1 point in against Toronto or against New England to finish the season would qualify Montreal for sure for the playoff. Because right now the seventh position has 39 points. That would be New England Revolution, and Montreal has 44. One more, and they cannot be caught. And you would like to have that point before next week's game, because if everything goes the wrong way for Montreal this weekend, they can find themselves close to New England going on a run, 2 wins, and then you never know what happened. Montreal gets a point against Toronto, and at least for them, they are safe.
Yeah, it's going to be an intense game. Just to back up real quickly to the DC NYCFC game, it is. I don't know. DC's not entirely in yet, so I would. That is a huge game, and it might be one of the bigger games on the docket here as well. Red Bulls Columbus is the other one there too for that battle royale for the top 2 spots, which is a massive thing too. But that's Kevin. Sorry, you were saying something?
DC needs 2 points. That's their magic. So if DC beats New York City FC, DC's in the playoff for sure. So that's what it all comes down to, the amount of point difference between every club and the New England Revolution.
Yeah, as I said, if New England's going to do a lot of people a favor by losing to Chicago. If they win to Chicago, they are going to put pressure on Philly and DC. That game, DC, New York, the reason I say that might be the most intense game of the weekend is because you look at that, there's high stakes for both of those teams. New York is in that battle with the other New York team in Toronto for the top 2 spots. If they were to drop points there and slip up, they could fall into that 3rd position, which is a big drop. You cannot understate how huge the difference between 2nd and 3rd is, because if you get 2nd, you're guaranteed a home and home, and you're guaranteed, to be into the 2nd round of the playoffs. You get that 3rd place game.
Yeah, and you're guaranteed 4 days of rest, Duane. 4 days between the play-in game and the actual conference semifinals.
Yeah, speaking from Toronto, see, I get the sense from, talking to TFC fans that most TFC fans assume that if they don't get second, their season's going to end 3 days later. Like that's just TFC, fatalistic thinking, but that's nonetheless what you get out of it. And it can happen, right? So, which is what this Toronto Montreal game is the other intense game of the weekend, because as you say, Montreal hasn't quite locked it up yet. Now, I think that it's likely that they'll get their 1 point either as a drop or a gain in the last 2 weeks, but nonetheless, TFC's got to look at that as they'd like to sort of put the pressure on Montreal to have to do that. And TFC, same deal. Montreal doesn't want to see TFC get that second spot. They're going to want to stop bad, and obviously they're both going to want to do things with their own accord too. So that's the game of actually the feature game on MLS in terms of their broadcasting too. They're hyping that one up through the gazoo, which is an interesting sort of development. Maybe they'll start to understand that TFC Montreal is a pretty intense rivalry that is as good as any in the league. So we'll see, although they overplay it, as we've talked about many times before. It's funny. Yes. I don't know how many Toronto fans are going to go up for this one, Kevin, because a lot of Toronto fans that I talk to, just if you're in Montreal and you're wondering about this, are like sort of saving their money for a playoff trip. So we'll see.
New York Red Bulls against the newly eliminated Columbus Crew.
Yeah, and again, it's a must-win for New York. Columbus, I don't have a lot of faith in the Crew right now to do much of anything. My pick to win the East all year has been the Red Bulls, and looking at the final 2 weeks of the schedule, I think that it's set up for that. I could see DC taking points off NYCFC, and I could see Montreal taking points off Toronto. So I think that the Red Bulls are set to maybe even clinch the East this week if the results. Well, they can't clinch it this week, but they can certainly eliminate Toronto this week if the results go that way.
And just quickly in the Western Conference, we have Dallas, Seattle. Seattle eliminated from are they? No, exactly. Seattle is actually in fourth. They're the late season surge. Sorry about that. I was confusing him with the Portland in seventh. Looking in, they face Colorado, Duane, which is a tough team to face right now. Portland needs a win, needs something to get back, be above that red line. So it's interesting matchup where we're Colorado now battling for that supporter shield. They have something to gain, even though they're assured to make the playoff, and they're going to have a bye the first round of the playoff. They still want that shield, and Portland might be in trouble.
Well, yeah. I mean, Colorado controls its destiny right now. They win their final 2 games, and it's a pretty favorable schedule, and they will win the Shield. So this is by no means a walkover for Portland that has been pretty terrible all year, basically, in their defense of the championship. Let's just call a spade here. They have not played particularly well this year. However, Portland is at home, where they are quite good. This is the most challenging game for Colorado in this stretch out, and it will be an interesting game that way. Portland, look. They got lucky at the right time last year. That's not a diss on them. That's how MLS works. So they were the beneficiaries of that. But to suggest that and a lot of people are expressing shock that they may make this playoff this year, but that's a false narrative. You're suggesting that Portland was one of the better teams last year. They were a hot team that won the title at the right time, but they weren't one of the top teams in the league last year. So the fact that they might miss the playoffs this year is hardly surprising, and it shouldn't be to anyone who understands that playoffs are just, there's a lot of luck that happens in a playoff run. Let's move past that, though. LA Houston. Again, Houston already out. Obviously, they want to play spoiler, which is, what any team at this position is going to say. But the Galaxy are a funny team. They can't get the bye, but what they can do is, and this is why it's important down the stretch to never really stop when you're in the playoff spot. Now that the highest rating seed hosts the MLS Cup, and anything can happen in the playoffs, as we well know, you're going to want every point you can get to try and push yourself above those Eastern teams. Right now, the Galaxy are 1 point behind Toronto. They are 3 points behind the 2 New York teams. If they can push ahead of those, they can guarantee themselves to hosting the MLS Cup if they make it there, right? If you know what I mean, because you make the MLS Cup final, you've eliminated. The teams are higher you. So, yeah, you want to be as high up the table as you can.
That's interesting. Yeah, exactly. And there's a question that we were asked on Twitter, like, is it important the fact that teams are all playing at the same time, even though with their playoff structure, you don't necessarily have the same questioning? It's not, who's going to win? If there's like 2-3 teams that have 1 or 2 points to win the whole season. No, it's more positioning. That's the important thing. Is going to get home field advantage? Are you going to get maybe go from finishing third to finishing second if you're in the Eastern Conference and having that bye? That's the importance of playing the game at the same time at the end, is so you have that drama, that storyline of who's going to finish first in the East, depending on the results today. But that's what they're going after.
Well, it's all hashtag narrative here. I don't think that there's any chance that these teams are going to collude, which is why back in the day, originally started to play games simultaneously at the end of seasons, right? In case money was passed under the table. I don't think that's happening here, but certainly from a marketing standpoint, that's what it is. And this is basically the dress rehearsal for the final week for MLS. They did this for the last weekend last year. This year, they're going to do it all at the same time on the final week. And I think it's dress rehearsal. I really think that from the league's TV production, broadcasting, marketing side, so that they can sort of get a feel, so that they can really nail the final week to get all the drama down. And I think they're also perhaps looking at last year and noticing that there were a lot of dead rubbers in the last week last year, and I think there might be again this year. So by doing it 1 week back, you can really push that. And we're going to break now to here, and we're going to go here to now there, and we're going to do this. It's like a March Madness thing, right? Like ADHD wins out the day, and you get to jump around and get excited by all the things happening. So I understand why they're doing it from a marketing perspective. They also can, sell the title sponsorship, which they probably will. So there you go. It is kind of, I guess, fun. Although we all like to watch all the games too. That's the other side of it.
Yes, and you can't, at least unless you're like Duane and I, where you have like 22 screens in your living room and you can just switch back and forth.
Yeah, I have 1, 2, 3. I have 5 screens I can put up. Yeah. All right, a couple more games. RSL Sporting Kansas City, which is that's not dead rubber per se, but it's 2 teams that are kind of dispositioning themselves. And if you want to talk about dead rubbers, San Jose and Vancouver. That is, the pride playing for pride derby there. Literally a game, which I believe is the only game on the schedule, just looking real quick, that has no meaning standing. So there you go. That's not bad, I guess. And that's what MLS will argue, that if they're 2 weeks to the end of the season and there's only one game on their schedule that is a complete dead rubber, then they've won their parity battle. That's the argument for it, Kevin.
Yes, I guess it is.
All right. Thank you, Grant, as always.
Yes, it's Friday.
And Kevin, I'll let you say goodbye. We'll be back on Monday.
Exactly. Monday, 11 a.m. live for Soccer Today on SPN Radio. Until then, enjoy your Premier League. Enjoy your MLS, NASL, USL playoff conference finals, and have a great soccer.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.